Hey everybody, welcome to Thought Villains. You're here with Kara Cashanova and not Derek Gibson because Derek is away campaigning in New York State for the governorship of New York. So it's just me today, and I'm here with my guest, Randy Ireland, who is my co-founder of Citizens Against Political Persecution. We're shortly going to bring in our other guest, Justin Hutler. That's his name, Randy? Hutler? Justin Hutler?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Justin, for messing up your name. It's been a long day. But Justin is the best friend of Timothy Hale-Cusanelli, who is one of the political prisoners being detained right now in Washington, D.C., illegally being detained by the United States government in Washington, D.C. He's one of 40 in a pod in D.C. right now that have been there pretty much since January 6th, being held without bail. So a very interesting thing happened yesterday, and that's what we're going to talk about. The United States Court of Appeals, and I have the papers right here in front of me for the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. This is an appeal of a pre-trial detention order. Now, this came out yesterday. This decision came out that they were not going to let Mr. Hale-Cusanelli out of prison, out of jail, out of Washington, D.C. jail, because of all the reasons listed in this document, which we're going to go over. Now, this went before three judges, Judge Tattle, Wilkins, and Rao. There's three circuit judges, and this here is the opinion of the court filed by Judge Wilkins, who I think it's notable to say that he was an Obama-appointed judge. So this is the decision, and we are going to go over this decision today. It's very interesting. I suggest everybody reads this decision. It's 13 pages long. I think it pertains to all Americans because basically what this decision is saying, Randy, is that the government can detain you before prison. Can detain you before trial. Doesn't matter if you committed a violent crime or even a crime that's considered, destructive. All the guy did in this case was he walked into the U.S. Capitol, and it admits in these pages that he walked in after the doors had already been opened and it was already compromised. So he walked in. That is his crime. That is what they are charging him with. But based on things he said in the past that are perceived to be racist by the government and things that he said that were perceived to be insensitive, I guess, and also the opinions of his coworkers that they interviewed that he's racist, and other factors like a petty crime that he was accused of when he was 19 years old for being involved in a group that built a potato gun and apparently shot it at a house because there was a dispute over bicycles. This happened when he was 19 years old, I think over 10 years ago. All of these factors come into play for the government to say that he is racist and a danger, basically, to the community. Therefore, he should not be let out of DC jail. He's been there for 6 months right now, hasn't been convicted of a single crime, hasn't been charged with a violent crime. He's been charged with basically trespassing. They're saying that that is enough to keep him in jail and deny him bail. Such important stuff to look into, Randy. I'm very excited to have Justin on, who is, like I said, his best friend. He's going to clarify, not that it needs clarification. He's going to clarify some of the quote unquote racist remarks that were made by Mr. Timothy Hale-Cusanelli, and explain that this is a kid who has a very interesting sense of humor. He's a shock jock. He says things just to get a rise out of people, which is his constitutional right to do. And he's going to explain what a lot of the statements in here meant, what a lot of the things in here really meant. So I think that that's going to be interesting, but they don't even need, in my opinion, to be justified. People have a right to freedom of speech. So yeah, I'm excited to meet him. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this before we pull him on the line.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'll say is that, here at CAPP, we've been talking about, these guys being unconstitutionally detained. We've been talking about habeas corpus, lack of due process. These are constitutional rights given to everybody. Now, this particular case focuses on that because it's almost like the judges getting a front row seat to the judges, how they justify, taking away habeas corpus or the right for bail. And
Right.
this
Right.
is a perfect example because it's like they pick together straws of different little things. They throw it all together and they say, oh, in totality of everything, going back 10 years, going in,
Right. So they're basically picking apart person's past, and not even things that were necessarily criminal. More or less, they're going to your workplace. They're asking your colleagues if they think like, oh, do you think this guy's racist? So, some of his colleagues said yes, and that's again subjective.
Right.
They basically entrapped him. So there's a confidential human source in here. Actually, it was his friend that they convinced to wear wires and entrap him into saying certain things that I don't even find to be that inflammatory or that offensive. So they entrapped this guy into saying things regarding the Civil War, regarding a Civil War, which again wasn't even that bad. It goes on to clarify later in the pages, that he actually said he is against any death if there is a Civil War. So you can't make this stuff up. Like, you can't. The government is persecuting American citizens right now. It should be like, it literally should be looked down. Like, people need to say that this is wrong from all levels, from Democrat from liberal to libertarian to Republican to people who don't even care about politics, because this is going to affect you in the future. This is setting a terrible precedent right here. So we're going to go over this paper right now. We're going to bring Justin on. To give you a quick background and synopsis of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about the political prisoners in Washington, D.C. And we're going to talk about a specific case today that pertains to Justin Hutler's friend. And he's here today to talk to us a little bit about his friend and tell us who his friend is that's currently being imprisoned right now in Washington, D.C. jail. So to give everybody a little bit of background on this, yesterday, Wednesday, an appeals court this is an article from Politico. I'm going to read directly from this article. Appeals court narrows release prospects for Capitol riot defendants. Some accused of violence on January 6th may still be subject to pretrial detention, the DC Circuit says. So yesterday, a federal court appeals decision said it would make it more difficult for some of the more than 535 suspects charged in the Capitol riot to win release from custody as they await trial. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit ruled that even defendants not accused of violence against others or destruction of property could be kept behind bars pending trial because of other indications that they pose a danger to the community. So this is very interesting and very scary stuff. The appeals court decision upheld the detention of Timothy Hale-Cusanelli, and just correct me if I'm mispronouncing Mr. Hale-Cusanelli. Is that how I say it? Cusanelli, okay. An Army reservist from New Jersey, arrested about a week and a half after the storming of the Capitol on January 6th. Prosecutors have said that Cusanelli, espoused white supremacist views to colleagues and boasted of his role in taking over the Capitol during the planned tabulation of electoral votes. He faces felony charges of obstruction of an official proceeding and interfering with police during civil disorder, as well as misdemeanor charges for entering the Capitol without permission and protesting there. Basically, DC Circuit Judge Robert Wilkins said that there was no clear error by the trial court judge, who concluded that Mr. Hale-Cusanelli's past history, his expressed bias against African American and Jews, which we'll talk about, and his use of violent rhetoric in connection with the January 6th events made him unsuitable for release. Okay, so basically, I'm not going to read further. Everybody, you can check this article out. This is in Politico. If you just put that into a search engine, you can read that article for yourself. What we're really going to go over today is the United States Court of Appeals documents. I have it here. It's 13 pages. That is basically, we're going to go over this decision that the court made today, that it's okay to hold American citizens in detention, no trial date in the near future at all, in solitary confinement, as long as they see fit that this person's speech, like it's about freedom of speech, so that they're using things that he said in the past against him, things that he said that they're saying was anti-Semitic or anti-African American. Everybody is entitled to free speech as far as I'm concerned. That's why I kind of feel weird doing this podcast, justifying the things that he said. I don't agree with, obviously, I'm not racist. I don't believe that I'm better than anybody else based on my race, but I believe in freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And if somebody wants to say things that I don't agree with, I would defend their right to say those things. And in the case of Mr. Hale-Cusanelli, from talking to his family members and his friends, like Justin, who's a guest today, many of the things he had said were taken out of context and are being completely misconstrued by the government, probably knowingly. So they're using the things he said in the past against him to keep him behind bars. And that's just crazy to me. He committed no violent act. He destroyed no property. He was arrested for entering the Capitol, basically for trespassing. And because of things he's done in the past, things he said on his podcast, things that he has said on social media, they feel that is justifiable to hold him in detention in solitary confinement in DC jail, no bail. So that's what the DC judge found yesterday, which everybody should find to be very scary, because now we know that anything you say in social media can and will be used against you. So be careful what you're saying, I guess. I mean, social media is evil, but I never really realized that it could be used to entrap you. So there's so much to go through in this court document. Justin, thank you so much for coming and being a part of this today. As the audience knows, there's over 40 people being held in DC jail right now, pending trial, being held we're in solitary confinement now because of activists and like Citizens Against Political Persecution, and really brave, very few journalists that have been exposing the conditions there. They're giving them more hours of time outside of the cell, but they're still being held in torture-like circumstances, as far as I'm concerned, in DC jail. So you're friends with Timothy Hale-Cusanelli.
Yes.
And you've been friends since college?
We were 14 years old since freshman year of high school. We lived where we lived. I lived in Howell at the time. He lived in Freehold Township. They're bordering towns. We were district together for high school. So that was the first time I met him. I never met him in middle school or before that.
Okay. And so you've basically been good friends ever since. And how old are you guys now?
We're both 31. I turned 31 in February. He turned 31 in March.
Okay. So first of all, when you first heard that your friend got arrested and he was being detained in DC jail, like, what were your first thoughts?
My heart dropped because I already knew that if he got arrested, that somebody dimed him out, or
Right.
or there was real evidence against him. I knew it wasn't. I knew when he got arrested that it wasn't him getting released under his own recognizance 3 hours later. I knew that wasn't going to happen.
Right. And according to his information here, that he was enlisted in the Army Reserves. He worked as a Navy contractor in New Jersey,
Correct.
traveled to Washington, D.C. He had traveled there to attend the Stop the Steal rally, just like
Correct.
almost a million other Americans did. He
Correct.
wore a suit and tie. He didn't bring any form of a weapon, according
Correct.
to this motion. He eventually made his way into the Capitol, where he entered through the doors that had already been kicked in. Now they're actually acknowledging that in this paper. This government paper, they're acknowledging that he entered doors that had already been kicked in. He apparently left the Capitol after learning that somebody had been shot, which was Ashley Babbitt. So he later admitted to a confidential human source, a rat, that he had participated in the events at the Capitol on January 6th. I don't know if it's public information or if you would feel comfortable, but is the confidential human source somebody that he had already known?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it was a friend of his.
Someone who he thought was a friend, which
Right.
it speaks. And before we go any further, just because this is something good to keep on everyone's mind, this shows you he's a very trusting person.
Right.
This isn't somebody who looks at another human being and second guesses their motives or sizes up who they are. Looking at it from an outsider's perspective, the idea that he felt confident enough to be honest with somebody over something like this, that tells you a little bit about his character. It tells you who he is. This isn't somebody that is always looking over his shoulder, making sure that no one's going to hurt him or no one's
Right.
going to do something bad to him. This is a trusting individual.
Okay. So this was somebody that he was friends with and he felt that he could trust. And basically the FBI had gotten this person, I'm assuming, to wear some sort, to either record on the phone.
They wore a wire.
They wore a wire. So they wired. So for somebody that walked into the Capitol, didn't break anything, and was not even violent, the FBI has gone so far. This is the crazy thing, to wire somebody and have them entrap another American citizen, their friend. This is how far they're going to persecute these people. It's almost, it's completely insanity. So they tap somebody to entrap this gentleman. He was a friend, and have conversations with him where I don't even find them to be problematic, these conversations that were had. I'll read some of them. So in the conversation, Hale-Cusanelli admitted to using voice and hand signals to urge other members of the mob to advance in the Capitol. Okay. Other members of the mob, like, let's just put that in English that isn't so accusatory. He kind of encouraged other people to walk in the doors that were already kicked in, just like he had.
He basically encouraged the people that were behind him that would have trampled him to death if he didn't encourage them and try to put some direction to it. He encouraged them, hey, go that way. Don't run me over and, trample me to death. There's layers. There's so many layers to this.
Right. I know. And as we know, and as from my experience from looking into all of this stuff, the FBI will completely use like any type of video against you, and they'll misconstrue things. So he was actually trying to get people not to trample him and calm down, not to trample other people.
They use the word hand signals. That's, I know what quote unquote hand signals were used, because we've had that conversation. It was more along the lines of go that way. It wasn't,
just like what everybody does every day, like, oh, move, go, like, you know what I mean? But somehow this is a huge crime according to this document. So he used hand signals. Basically, he told people to move over or pointed them in the right direction, but he was using quote unquote hand signals to urge other members of the mob to advance in the Capitol to advance.
Correct.
So he further admitted to picking up a flagpole. So let's read from here. This is what it's saying, that someone else had thrown like a javelin at a police officer and referred to it as a murder weapon. So let's address that. But it goes on to say, Hale-Cusanelli is not accused of using or threatening to use the flagpole of a weapon. He admitted to NCIS and the FBI agents that he had used his military training and a face covering to protect himself after he was exposed to pepper spray. So, yes. So could we talk a little bit? Do you know anything about?
He picked the flag up, the flagpole up, because it had an American flag on it, by the way.
And somebody else, let's mention that this is what it says in here. Somebody else had thrown this pole like a javelin at a police officer, not him.
Yes.
And he referred to it as a murder weapon. So he said in passing, like, this could be construed anyway. Oh, this is a murder weapon. I mean, did he say he was going to use it as a murder weapon?
No. He
exactly.
He merely picked it up at the time out of an instinct because it had an American flag on it. Now, what could have happened with it later is open to interpretation from anybody. But he picked it up not to use as a weapon, not to injure somebody with, and he didn't use it as a weapon, and he didn't injure somebody with it.
Right.
He picked it up because it had an American flag on it.
Right. Exactly. So this is being, again, completely misconstrued. It is so evil. So, and he was not accused of using or threatening it to use a flagpole as a weapon. And that's basically what it says here. What? Could you guys hear me?
Yes.
Is my microphone good?
You were breaking up for a second.
I'm so sorry. Let me put my microphone closer. So
you're breaking up.
Am I breaking up?
No. I think it's his internet connection.
It might be me, because I think it's starting to rain here.
No problem. Sorry, everyone. We really wanted tonight to be able to interview you. So it's kind of like we set this up kind of really fast because we think it's important that to get this story out and make sure that, that what they've done is they've basically really smeared this kid's reputation on the internet. Like if you put his name in the internet, the crazy, and we'll do that later. We'll put his name in and we'll see what comes up. The fake news, the propaganda artists, they basically libeled and slandered him like no other, person, calling him a Nazi, misconstruing things that he had said, but we'll talk about that later. But let's continue with the, so you explained the quote unquote murder weapon comment that he made, which is nothing. So in the recorded conversation with the spy, with the rat, Hale-Cusanelli described the adrenaline, the rush, the purpose he felt on January 6th, which he compared to the Civil War. Now, how many people out there, everybody knows we've had these conversations about like stuff having to do with the Civil War. So it was basically misconstrued. He spoke to his friend and he said it was only a matter of time before a civil war broke out along partisan lines, but that they don't want to fire the first shot because all of the guns and resources are in Republican hands. This is quoting Hale-Cusanelli, and Republicans make up 70% of the military. He also said that in the event of a civil war, it's not going to be New York or California winning that day. It's going to be the good old boys from the Midwest, Texas, and Arkansas.
Yep.
He told the confidential human source, or whatever they're calling this spy, that he really wishes there could be a civil war. So this person, this spy, interrupted and said, but a lot of people would die. And he replied, Thomas Jefferson said the tree of liberty should be refreshed with the blood of patriots and tyrants. Now, go on.
Real quick, just because there's a layer, again, there's layers to this.
Yes.
If you met Tim and you had a conversation with him, you would understand when he says things to somebody that doesn't understand what he means, they're going to run with it and think that he's a crazy person. He is a history buff. He could probably, without exaggeration, embarrass 80% of anyone that would claim to be an historian. And I'm not just saying that, that's reality. What he meant was when he used the term Civil War, he didn't necessarily mean race-wise.
Right.
To him.
Well, no, I didn't even read it like that to begin with. It was Civil War.
I just want to make it clear though. He meant it from the mindset of Republican versus Democrat.
Right.
And it'll be the good old boys from the Midwest, meaning those obvious red areas.
Right.
So and there's a reason why I'm saying this, because the confidential informant is a different race than Tim. So that's also why I'm bringing that up. The context to that conversation was spun 180 degrees different than what you're reading on the paper.
Right. I'm sure it was, as it always is when it comes to stuff like this.
That person specifically used the term Civil War to bait him to have anyone think.
It's entrapment. So basically this person was trying to trap him and bringing up conversation subject matter that wouldn't have came up if this person wasn't trying to trap him. It's entrapment. It's completely wrong.
And reading that conversation, you would think it was coming when he uses those terms that he means, Civil War race-wise. That's not what that's not where he's saying it. But the person that initiated that conversation tried to bring it from that mindset.
Right. So this person so the FBI, I'm assuming, approached this person and basically put a recorder on him and said, try to get him talking, try to get him bragging. Like that's
exactly what happened.
Right. And we all have friends, like, I think a lot of the cases with these guys, and I'm not going to speak specifically to your friend, but just in general, a lot of people that day were bragging because they didn't realize the severity of it. And they were kind of sort of exaggerating things a little bit for their social media channels. Like, oh my God, we just did this, we just did that. And, it was like the adrenaline rush. And I don't think they realized that they were incriminating themselves by kind of almost exaggerating and acting like,
of course,
you know what I mean? Like a badass almost. I know a lot of people that did that. That's just the feeling I get. They went on social media. They were excited about it because we were all there and we saw that nothing was really done that was violent or it was not a government overthrow in any way. So I don't think anybody could have ever fathomed in their head from that day what this would turn into and that they would be painted as insurrectionists, or I don't think anybody would have posted anything on social media.
I can tell you he wholeheartedly never in a million years dreamt that he would be in the situation he's in. I can promise you that.
Right. I'm certain that and that's probably the case with a lot of guys. And there was something interesting in here that pertained to that. Did you get to read this? There was something in there that was specifically going about the whole civil war thing, because one of the things that they don't really embellish on that he said was he doesn't want people to die. He goes on to say in that same conversation, but I don't want people to die. So he said that in the conversation, and that's noted, but they put it all the way in the back of this paperwork where it's really, unless you have patience to read through this whole thing, you're not going to see that.
Tim wants change, and that's exactly where his mind was at. And he didn't mean change with racial cleansing or any of that nonsense. He meant change, meaning like, we go back to being a country that's proud, and we go back to being a country that honors the Constitution, and, believes in Judeo-Christian values. Not that there's not room for other
Right.
religions or other lifestyles. We need to kind of go back to certain values and certain things, and that's where again you would have to, if anyone knew him, they would have a conversation with him and realize that the furthest thing, believe it or not, is racist, because he wants everybody in the country to be proud of the country that they live in, and he wants
Right.
the success for the country for everybody.
Right. And this is all his freedom of expression, just like anybody else,
Just
And
so,
so,
just so you know, Kara, it's page 11 is where he clarifies that Civil War.
okay, so we have to go all the way to page 11 in this document,
I'm gonna,
right, so page 11, okay, because we just read the statement that he said that the
I'm gonna share.
confidential human source recorded with his wiretap, he said,
No,
where is it?
nor is it apparent.
Nor is it apparent that it was plain error for the district court to rely upon the appellate's Civil War statements to find that he was a danger to the community. They go to clarify that he said, when I say I want civil war, it's not like I want to see people dead in the street. And that civil war, not that I actually want that. I think that civil war is probably the simplest, not the simplest solution. Not that the simple solutions are always the best solutions, but I think it probably is the simplest solution and the most likely outcome inevitably. So that's what he went on to say after that quote unquote incriminating statement that he said he wanted civil war. He clarified that he doesn't want people to die. So I think that right there, that should have been clarified to whoever is the FBI agent on this case, that he is not a danger to the community, but still they find he is. So we'll move on, but that clarified his statement there. Let's see. It said, okay, he had a YouTube channel. So I know a lot of people, if they see this video or any other video about Mr. Hale-Cusanelli, they're going to probably Google his name. And what is going to come up is him dressed up as Hitler. Let's just address that. So he dressed up as Hitler. And if you could tell us a little bit more about that, Justin, because like I said, anybody Googling his name, that's what.
No, it's a fantastic story. So Tim worked at Weapon Stations Earl in Colts Neck, and he did overnight security. He's been there for, at this point, before obviously everything in January, he was there for, I want to say, 2 years working for them. In that time, he became a union rep, which we'll touch on later, but I just want to tell this part of the story. He became a union rep, and he climbed in the company and was a valued employee. Only thing he didn't like about the job was he had a boss that he didn't really see eye to eye with. So when he was letting his hair grow out intentionally to just aggravate and agitate his boss, because again, that's the kind of guy he is. He likes humor and he likes pushing people's buttons. So he grew his hair out where it would have, the long hair in the front. And because he has the pale white skin, somebody told him, wow, you look like Hitler, because he used to flick his hair to the side and part it in the front. And somebody told him, you look like Hitler. So the next day, not the next day, he stopped shaving his mustache. He let his mustache grow intentionally just to aggravate his superior, his boss. It had nothing to do with anything else than aggravating his employer. That's the beginning, the end.
But nobody in the news, the fake news, has bothered to ask why or how that happened. All they have done is called him a Hitler sympathizer. So Correct. If you put in, why don't you do a Google search right now, Randy, for Hale-Cusanelli, and do a Google search and just see what comes up. January 6th. I'm making the assumption that's what's going to come up, is they're going to be calling him a Hitler sympathizer, a Nazi, neo-Nazi, every other buzzword that they could find to make him seem like a monster to other human beings, and to continue to contaminate the jury pool when he eventually does have.
It was nothing but a joke.
Jury. Yeah, right. It was a joke.
It was nothing but a joke.
Right.
Purely to aggravate his boss.
But if did the news ever ask that question? Did the media ever reach out and say, could you explain this picture of Hitler?
No, absolutely
So
not.
they're calling him the Hitler-loving insurrectionist with secret level security, blah, blah, blah. Go up, roll up, Randy. Navy probe. Oh, hold on a second. White supremacist, neo-Nazi sympathizer. Fed say he's a white supremacist.
Had a
Hitler mustache. So that's what's going to come up. So basically, like anybody Googling his name, this is what's going to come up. Okay, so we're moving on to his, it says here in this paper, this document, that his criminal history is limited. In 2010, he was arrested with 3 other co-defendants. Justin, you mentioned that one of those was you.
Correct.
After one of them made a homemade PVC launcher or a potato gun to fire frozen corn cobs at a home in Howell Township, New Jersey.
Howell, yep.
Howell, my bad, sorry, I'm
Okay.
from New York.
It's okay.
Okay, so we'll address this. On the potato gun were the words Widowmaker and white is right.
Yeah.
As well as a drawing of the Confederate flag. Hale-Cusanelli additionally had a punch dagger, a short bladed dagger design so that the blade protrudes from the front of the individual's fist in his possession at the time. This is 10 years ago, let's keep in mind. And this is, each member of the group was charged with conspiracy to commit criminal mischief and possession of a weapon. He ultimately pleaded guilty to disorderly conduct. A police report describing the potato gun incident provided further details, but Hale-Cusanelli did not bring these details to the district court's attention. According to the police report, one of the arresting officers concluded that this does not appear that there was any bias-related intent involved with this particular offense. The officer stated that he was not aware of any Black individuals residing at the home, and that one of Hale-Cusanelli's co-defendants admitted he had targeted the home because of a prior dispute with one of its residents over bicycles. According to the government, 2 harassment complaints were filed against Hale-Cusanelli in February and March of 2020. The complaints were both filed by the Jewish individuals who accused him of posting their names online and addresses. No further details are available in the record. So basically, they're using his past with this potato gun incident, which they're going to explain to us, and other complaints filed that of him posting online. Jewish
Break out a little
individuals.
bit. Okay.
So could you tell us a little bit about, like, just briefly about the potato gun incident and what that was?
So Tim was one of 4 co-conspirators, quote unquote, me being one of them as well. And Tim didn't fire it, wasn't his plan, it wasn't his idea. He was just somebody who was in the car at the time. And we basically, the incident happened. We, it was more like a prank than anything else. And we got arrested for it and charged with possession of a homemade firearm. And then after, working it out with the prosecutor, we were able to plead it down to misdemeanor criminal mischief, no different than toilet papering a house or playing loud music.
Right. So these were like 20-year-old kids, basically 19, 20 years old.
I was going to say at the time, might have been 19,
Right.
not a huge difference, but we were like fresh out of high school.
Right.
Dumb, young, idiot kid.
Right. Exactly. So everybody has an incident like this in their past. They had a dispute over bicycles and they built potato guns. Tim, as you said, wasn't even the person who, he just was there along for the ride, sort of, and it pleaded down to disorderly conduct.
He didn't fire it. He didn't drive the car. He was in the car. It had,
Right, so-
wasn't his plan. Out of everybody in the car, he was, for argument's sake, the least involved. And, again, it was nothing. It was a slap on the wrist, don't do this again. Okay.
Right. So
Nothing.
basically, like anything in your past can and will be used against you now, according to this precedent that this terrible decision is setting a terrible precedent. That's what a lot of people fear, that it's going to just set the stage for the rest of the January 6th defendants, and if they can be held or not and detained based on their past and based on their speech of the past. It's setting a terrible precedent, not just for the January 6th guys, but just for everybody moving forward. That's what's so scary about this. I mean, we've all made mistakes. When I was 20 years old, I mean, I made plenty of mistakes, and they all of them which can be misconstrued and held against me, just like anybody else.
Absolutely.
And that's very frightening. And then he was what was it, disorderly conduct? So
it was at the end of it, it was criminal mischief. It was nothing.
Criminal mischief, and
it was nothing. It was nothing.
It was
that
settled in the court, and they're bringing it up this many years later and using this, which is so manipulative and evil. So, I mean, I don't even know what other words to say to use it. So they said that The district court concluded that the nature and circumstances of the offense factor weighed just slightly in favor of release because he was not charged with any offenses involving violence or destruction of property. Nevertheless, they expressed concern that his admission that he had urged others to essentially storm the Capitol building and enter it despite police presence, tear gas, fences, and what have you. I'm assuming that was to the person that they had spying on him,
Yes.
who entrapped him into saying things, probably just kind of being a guy bragging that
Yep.
he wouldn't have, I don't even think said, had he not been entrapped.
Correct.
Second, the district court concluded that the weight of the evidence was overwhelming and that the factor therefore weighed in favor of detention. So they think that all these factors together, the fact that he had this incident with this potato gun over a bicycle when he was 19 years old. He had said some inflammatory speech, which is everybody's right to say. I don't even want to justify the things he said because I don't even believe we have to. I think that if somebody says something that that I find offensive, that's not reason that you should be able to detain them in prison. And that's what they're doing. But you do want to address this and say that that he's said to have said anti-Semitic things in the past. Do you want to hit on that?
This is where it would have to be, to understand this right and the right way, you would have to have a conversation with him, but
Right.
I'll try to summarize it. I mean, Tim is, like I said, a very conscious person when it comes to history and what goes on in the world. And there are certain facts that he will express, and not everybody wants to hear it. Not everybody
Right.
wants to hear that, Hollywood is mainly, a certain group of people. Nobody wants to hear that the banks, are a certain group of people. I mean, this isn't a conspiracy theory. It's stuff that anybody at any given time can find out. And it's not saying that it's a bad thing. It's just stating, a fact. And
Right.
that's-
So, or even if it's an opinion, whether it's a fact or an opinion, you have freedom of speech in this country, whether people want to agree with it or not. I'm Asian, and recently I had a conversation with another activist who had said things that a lot of people perceive to be racist against Asian people. But I could sit there and have a conversation and say to him, you have freedom of speech, and you're entitled to your opinion.
absolutely.
You shouldn't be penalized for having an opinion, and maybe I don't like you, and maybe I would prefer not to socialize with you, but does that make it so would I want to see you go to jail for saying something that was offensive about Asian people? It's ridiculous. And what is offensive to one person is not offensive to another, so it's completely subjective. And that's why I think it has to be so important that people have freedom of speech with no restrictions. You should be able to say your opinion, and no matter how offensive it is to other people, and state what you perceive to be facts, no matter how offensive it is to other people, because it's so subjective and it's so dangerous when people start trying, like these judges start trying to decipher speech, because they could pin it any way they want. And that's what's so dangerous about this. They could pin anybody as a racist at this point. They could pin anybody as a white supremacist based on something that they said. And it's just crazy. It's so dangerous. If somebody doesn't want to take the vaccine, they'll call them an extremist, and they'll say that they had said hate speech in the past, and they'll pull something and just make it fit their narrative, which is what's so scary. Any other type of activist, any other type of person that doesn't agree with the government, they're going to say, oh, well, he said hate speech in the past. And it's like I said, now it's become completely subjective. That's why organizations like the ACLU were so important before they became an arm of the left, because they were there to protect people's constitutional rights, even when they were, what everybody else in society considered to be jerk offs. Because if we don't protect the constitutional rights of our enemies, then it's almost like we're stabbing ourselves in the heart, or I don't even for lack of a better expression, because you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
The
I
one
think
thing
that's the case with him, and I don't want to spend all of this time justifying the things that he said, because he has the right to his freedom of speech, whether we agree with him or not. And if he's going to be penalized for saying things that were unpopular and that people disagree with, and he's going to be detained on those grounds for, he was in there on January 6th. He didn't commit any violent crimes. He didn't break anything, but they're holding him based on speech that they're perceiving to be racist, and on a petty crime that he committed when he was 19 years old, that he plead down to a violation having to do with a potato gun and a bicycle. They're using this evidence this is political persecution, obviously, to hold him and detain him in DC jail as he awaits trial in torturous circumstances, as far as I'm concerned.
Just to give you a little bit of an idea of the mindset of the U.S. government, there was 3,000 books that he had in his possession. Out of those 3,000 books, there's 2 of them that you'll read about in the report. He had a copy of Mein Kampf, and he had a copy of the Turner Diaries, which is a book about an alternative future in the United States where there's a civil war. Out of the
Right.
3,000 books that he had, those are the 2 that you read about in the report.
Of course. So
They
now
they don't talk about him having 40 different,
like the Bible or a self-help
Having
book,
the-
which
having
I'm
the
sure that he
Bible.
had, right?
having the Bible, having the Quran, having 40 different iterations of encyclopedias, having, more information than anybody, but they talk about those 2.
It's
So-
terrible. So basically, like 3,000 books, that means he reads a lot. So now just picture your 3,000 Google searches, right?
Correct.
And if they go on your phone and look through your Google searches, I'm sure everybody's going to be embarrassed in one way or another. If not embarrassed, like there's things they've Googled that that's your privacy. It's called privacy. You have a right to Google what you want. You have a right to read what you want. It's not the government's business. And it doesn't have anything to do with keeping him in jail for walking into the Capitol. Like if people don't start speaking up against this and understanding what's happening here, you should be very afraid, because you could be charged with a crime at any point in the future. They can go back into your reading material on Google or in your house and look at your books, and they could actually use these against you to keep you in jail. They could petty crimes or think, oh, let's talk about his coworkers. There were 34 coworkers that said in here that spoke ill of him. So they're going to go to your job and they're going to get everybody at work that doesn't like you for whatever the reason. You might not be popular. They can't wait to talk to the FBI now and put you in jail, because this is the way America is right now. They talked to 34 of his coworkers.
Very glad you brought that up.
And all these coworkers, I guess, were mentioned in this report.
So earlier on, as I explained how he got the job there, and he was voted to be the union rep. So take a step back for a second. He was voted by his peers to be the union rep and to represent them when it came to issues at work, their medical coverage, making sure that the job is following the Disabilities Act, because some of the gentlemen were disabled. How did 34 people that voted him in as their rep and relied on him when it comes to anything regarding the job, how did 34 people vote him in and then say ill of him? I'll tell you how. His boss, that he didn't get along with, went to every one of them and said, if you don't say this and play ball and do what we want you to do, you're not going to have a job here anymore. This is how bad it gets when they want to smear you.
Right. So
And
I wonder where that was. So his boss most really didn't dislike him, unless the FBI kind of had a hand in that, which I wouldn't put past them.
And that's not open to interpretation. You can Google and speak to any of his superiors. He was the union rep.
Right.
You don't get that. You don't get that just for seniority. You have to be voted in.
Wow. So so thank you so much, Justin, for, kind of clarifying. So what I after speaking to Timothy's family, a lot of them, people will say that he, and friends and family and friends, that you could really characterize him as somebody that has a really kind of different type of sense of humor. And a lot of this stuff is like satire that he says.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So they're taking it as literal.
A lot of it isn't to be taken seriously. Anyone.
He's sort of a shock jock, you could say.
Absolutely.
He likes to get a reaction.
He loves to be the center of attention. Whenever he's in a group of 10 people or more, he loves to be the center of attention, whether it's saying something vulgar or saying something that might borderline inappropriate. He'll say it, and some people can't handle that. And that's why when a lot of things are taken out of context, it's one of those things, you have to understand the person who's saying it more than what's being said.
Right. So this, yeah, no, I understand. We all have friends and we're all human beings. I think that any reasonable person could wrap their mind around that. So
You
in
know,
closing, the district court acknowledged that this was a close case, but it ruled that based on the totality of the circumstances, the government had met its burden. Reasonable minds might disagree in this determination. Yeah, the majority of people, I would think. But our standard of review is for clear error, not to substitute our judgment for that of the district court. We affirm basically to keep him detained and not to release him prior to trial. He's been in there for how long now?
since I believe January 20th, right around there. Could be a
Right.
couple, yeah. It's been so long now. It's,
This
it'll
is
be-
just so
it'll be-
interesting.
it'll
If
be
you
6
people
months soon.
read this, and we found this, what was the website we found this on, Randy? This United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, on appeal of a pretrial detention order, this decision, um, Jonathan Zucker, appointed by the court, was on the appellant's memorandum of law and fact. I mean, basically, this
Done.
is it's a decision and the explanation of why the court feels that he shouldn't be detained, that he shouldn't be released. And this is going to set a huge precedent in America moving forward. That's why I think it's important that people read this, and that I'll just read a little
One-
bit more of
the
the
one thing-
ending.
The one thing that I'll add to that is one of the reasons too, why this sets such a precedent is because this is an appeal. So the appellate court, this is the decision of an appellate court that was reviewing, the decision that a judge had made. So,
Right.
this is really one of the first times that I'm aware of where, any element of free speech has been used negatively towards somebody, so that in totality, they're denied bail.
Right. It's like, for me too, it's like the first, it's like, it's setting a really bad step moving forward.
There was
It's-
if someone wants to find that document, it's at cadc.uscourts.gov.
Right, and just type in Timothy Lewis Hale Cusanelli, and it should come up. You can read out all the other paperwork pertaining to him. I think this is a really good case to be taken to the Supreme Court. I think this is the case to be taken to the Supreme Court. This is like perfect. It's written literally to change the to what do you think? I mean, what do you guys think? I think that he should take this to the Supreme Court. I don't think there's any other better case that they should look at right now, that you could detain Americans pre-trial indefinitely based on things they've said in the past, and they're reading material and things that the fact that their coworkers don't like them and said that they were racist. You could hold them based on a combination of these factors put together. I mean, it's nuts.
I totally agree with that. And the one thing that I will say is, I think this is like you said, a perfect case that really should go to the Supreme Court on so many different levels. I mean, what we're seeing right now at this day and age is that we're in a war over the U.S. Constitution, and it's being shredded right before our very eyes. I mean, hate speech, nowhere in our Constitution does a person have a right not to be offended.
Right.
But the right is given to every single U.S. citizen of free speech. That means you can say what you want to say, regardless of who might get bent, who might disagree, who might whatever.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is, it's like now we're seeing, this whole concept of hate speech being, come from the university into American culture,
Right.
and now invading our courts that are
Right.
supposed to interpret based upon the Constitution. And these judges, I mean, it's insane what's happening with these judges.
Right.
I
And
mean-
it's completely it's just this, it's like this topic, it's completely insane. People should have a problem with this everywhere. If you one day decide you want to speak up against the government and show up at a protest and they decide to arrest people, they can use things that you've said in the past, whether it was on Twitter, they could pull your Twitter feed, they could pull your Facebook, they'll look at something you said in a video that you posted on your Facebook Live, they could go in your house and they could look at your reading material, they could ask your friend that no longer likes you to smear and say things about you like you're a racist. And they could use all of these subjective things, like what one person thinks is evil and another person doesn't, against you. Just because I could say something like, I don't believe that masks work. Like, let's just say, for example, and that's really offensive to some people. That's really offensive. The grounds where I should be put in jail because I don't care about public health. Like, that's what we're coming to, where it's like completely subjective what you can and you can't say.
Yeah.
So that's what's so scary about all this, and why I think this is a really standout development in this whole January 6th political prisoners story that we've been following. You know, I'm going to put this disturbing paperwork over here. So thank you, Justin, so much for coming on. Is there anything else that you want to say really in closing about your friend and you know, any appeal to the American people of why they have to listen to what we're trying to do here when it comes to freeing these political prisoners, letting the public know exactly what's going on and how this could affect them in the future and their kids in the future?
You know, it's in closing, it's a dangerous time to be an American, you know, and I never thought I would say that from the mindset of it's a dangerous time because our own government every day is eroding away everything that this country used to stand for. And they're not doing it at a pace that will even be able to sustain ourselves within 15 years.
Right.
We're not far away from the government telling you if your children aren't vaccinated, they're not going to be able to come to school. We're not far away from the government telling you if you don't believe in Black Lives Matter, your children won't be able to come to school. You know, it sounds like a fairy tale. It sounds like fantasy, but these things happen and they happen quick. You know, if nothing else from January and the pandemic, you know, you have people that are locked up that didn't hurt anyone, that, you know, in reality, everybody knows weren't there to really cause chaos. They were there to express themselves. They were there to, you know, maybe be belligerent, to maybe, you know, walk the line of what is appropriate as a citizen and what is not appropriate. But nobody was there to kill anybody. Nobody was there to beat anybody to death, which is the total opposite of what other groups have done. I'm not even going to mention that, but everybody knows that. You know, from take the lesson from this, you know, your free speech is on its way out. And, you know, we got to find a way to change that. You know, if
Right.
nothing changes, we're going to be having, you know, we're going to be having conversations that nobody wants to have in the near future, because it's just, our lifestyle is at risk.
Yeah. Well, thank
And
you so much.
I mean that at you know, with everything.
Yeah. And we're praying for your friend, Timothy. If people, you know, are interested, go on citizensapp.us. There's information for all, not just Timothy, but all the people who are being held right now in detention at the DC jail unconstitutionally. They're being held. You could write them, send them letters of encouragement. Please do that, because I think that I know that I've heard that really helps them in there. They need letters of encouragement. These things need to go to trial. You know, as far as I'm concerned, these cases need to go to trial so that America could see and everything could be exposed about January 6th. You know, if these guys play out and we're not going to really learn the truth, I feel. That's why they're trying to keep them in there detained, so that they lose their minds and they opt to play out. Whereas if they're awaiting trial at their own homes, you know, they could be involved in the trial. They could be studying legal documents. They could be speaking to their lawyers more freely. They could see the evidence being used against them. But right now they're in prison and they don't have access to any of this. So a lot of them will probably be tempted to play out. Hopefully Timothy doesn't. I think his case is the perfect case to go to the Supreme Court. And I'm hoping that they would see the merit in it and take the case and say that what they're doing right now, what they did to him, is unconstitutional. Therefore, it's unconstitutional for all Americans. So again, thank you, Justin, so much for coming on. Thank you, Randy. So one of the things, Randy, that we totally forgot to ask Justin about, which I had actually asked him about in a conversation prior to our Zoom podcast,
Right.
was to explain what was going on when it mentions this incident 12 years ago with the potato gun.
Right.
It mentions that it said white is right on the side of the potato gun and some other things. But there is an explanation for that. And he had offered that to me earlier on the phone. And like I said, we forgot to ask him when we just had him as a guest. But the explanation was that it was back then, I guess David Chappelle was very popular, and he did that whole Clay Bigsby, the blind racist skit. And this was kind of like a sarcasm sort of parody. This is just the sense of humor that these guys have. Throwback to that David Chappelle skit. So that's what he told me. And I really wanted him to explain that further, because it seems like there really is, in the case of Mr. Hale-Cusanelli, there really is an explanation. I'm not making excuses for this guy, believe me. I don't have to, because this is his free speech. But pertaining to this specific case of him, there really is an explanation for everything that is in this opinion. Like all the things that they're saying he did that was racist, that he said was racist, there really is an explanation as to why that's really not true and it's being misconstrued. So that was one of the things that I really wanted Justin to talk more about, was that incident with the potato gun where it said white is right on the side of it. And I just, I forgot to ask him to talk about that. But
that kind of brings me to my point. Everybody needs to keep in mind that potato gun incident happened 12 years ago.
Right. And he was 18 or 19 years old.
The other thing that they put in here, as if it like really matters, is that there was a drawing of the Confederate flag on there. It is absolutely asinine to me how grown, educated adults, we're talking prosecutors, we're talking judges here, are picking straws from so many different things years ago, this and that, stringing it all together to go out onto a ledge and say that this guy does not deserve to be out.
Right. Right. So he didn't commit, he trespassed into the Capitol and he left once he heard somebody was shot. You know, that is what he did. And he has been in jail. So people, listen to what I'm saying to you. Everybody that went to the Capitol that day, right? So now they can arrest you for going inside or for being on the grounds and they could keep you detained because you said something that is quote unquote racist or what is perceived to be racist, or because you have a sick sense of humor and you've exercised freedom of speech in the past. They could come arrest you and keep you in prison and detain you there for an indefinite amount of time just because you said something that is unpopular because you exercised your freedom of speech.
Exactly.
And in the case of this kid, it's like everything is being misconstrued, so that's what makes it even worse. But people, you have to be afraid. If any protester out there has to be afraid, you have to be terrified right now because you went to a protest and then they decided to come arrest you after it, and all you did was trespass. And they're going to keep you based on things you have said on social media in the past, based on books that you have in your house. It's completely irrelevant. It's terrifying. It's scary. People, you have to pay attention and wake up. People just, be careful. I guess what you say in social media, I don't even want to say that, right? It's like you have freedom of speech, but this stuff can and will be used against you. Social media is evil. It is the devil. Twitter should be abolished. Facebook should be abolished as far as I'm concerned. They're now using social media to entrap you. Okay, anything you put out on social media can and will be used against you in the future.
Well, I think, I don't know. I think that's the wrong stance to take.
I'm not saying it's the right or wrong stance. It's just my emotions right now running high. Obviously, I think people should be able to say whatever they want. But we're clearly seeing right here that it's going to be used against you.
Everybody needs the work that we have cut out for us. We need to educate the American people that this is going on to the extent that it's going on. And we all need to rise up, unite, and fight this. It's a war on our Constitution.
It is. And people, I'm going to not stress it more enough that you got to look into this specific case and read this opinion, okay, that was put out yesterday by the United States Court of Appeals. And we will put a link to that below so you can read this decision and know that the majority of it is BS. The majority of it is exaggeration and manipulation and entrapment. But the core of it is saying that your past speech, the opinions of your coworkers that you are racist, the books that you have in your house, and petty crimes that you committed 12 years ago that are completely irrelevant, that you already paid for with the criminal justice system can be used against you if you are arrested by the federal government for protesting and trespassing. That's what it's saying. So you need to read that. It pertains to everybody. I'm going to end it there, Randy, because I'm so tired. I'm so annoyed. I got to go to bed. We're going to be back and we're going to talk about this further.
These judges need to be kicked out. They do.
Right. These judges. I agree with you 100%. There needs to be some accountability for these terrible judges. This terrible Obama appointed judge, Circuit Judge Wilkins. Circuit Judge Wilkins, he needs to explain this ridiculous decision. This needs to be put to the Supreme Court. He needs to be fired. He needs to be held, the people need to hold him accountable. He's oppressing free speech and First Amendment rights. This needs to go to the Supreme Court. This needs to go to the Supreme Court. We will be back next week in the studio with Derek Gibson. Looking forward to seeing you then.
Thank you.